Hey, I'm here with Jane Andriuk, nee Kastelic, because she's going to be able to take us through the Kastelic family, Andriuks, and perhaps some others that she's more closely associated with. Jane was a teacher for 38 years, had 1 year right here at Sangudo, and is a dear friend. So
Oh,
letting Jane take over from here.
thank you, Iris. That's very kind. I have to think again about the 38. We're standing here by the graveside of Jenny Kastelic, and she was married to my dad's, that is Frank Kastelic's uncle, and so she has the Kastelic last name. However, she was married to Frank Weiss. That is the Frank Weiss we know as dad, who came from Slovenia to Butte, Montana, and they were there working as miners. Both Tony and all those people that came did that to make their way in this in the New World, and then they came north to Alberta to farm. So Jenny was married to Frank Weiss, and then he passed away, and then she married my dad's uncle, as I said, in I forget the year, but anyway, they were married, and they had. She was known as Jenny Weiss, and she had children already with Frank, and those individuals were also they were called Weiss, and that's it's just the way that the blended family went. So then she had three other children with Tony Kastelic. She had Eddie Kastelic, who's buried here, Mildred Anderson, and who was also, of course, Mildred Kastelic. And she had another a daughter named Annie, and I believe Annie was the oldest and Eddie was the youngest. I didn't quite get those in the order that I should have, but anyway, that's the connection there. So Tony Kastelic then was my dad's uncle. So we were all somehow nicely connected here and there. Anyway.
Hi, we're going to intercept Jane's family stories here too, because we've come across Sam Linko's headstone here, and he was a businessman in Sangudo as well, a military man, as you can see, but he had the pool hall and barber shop right on Main Street, just north of the hotel corner. He married Annie Popowich. The Popowiches lived down by the river at the ferry, ran the ferry when it was there. That was the same ferry that we had here that was floated there in 36. I have done an interview with Annie, and that's another one that you could access.
We're here now at the place of rest of Flora and Frank Weiss. And I was just speaking a little bit earlier here about Frank Weiss, whose mother was married to my dad, Frank Kastelic's uncle. Now, Frank and Flora married in 1941, and they were on the farm just east of where Flora grew up. Flora, I'll speak about her first. She was known by everyone as Auntie Flora. She was an amazing woman in every way you can imagine. She was an incredible cook, baker, gardener, just a woman who was not afraid to get in and roll up her sleeves, get her hands dirty, and then turn around and be all looking quite elegant and quite refined. She was just someone to remember. And I am very proud to add that she was my godmother, and she lived to be 103 years old. And in spite of all the things that she did in the community and with her family, she never stopped And it was her advice that she said to my husband and me. She said, just don't stop moving. Because when we asked her, what's the secret to your longevity? And that's what she said. And she truly did follow that advice of her own.
Jane, how about her maiden name?
Oh, Flora Weiss was known as Flora Kennedy. She was one of the, I believe she was the older daughter of Flora and Margaret Kennedy, and they had twin brothers, John and Alan, and they lived just down the road from our farm, from the Kastelic farm, and we were very good friends with the Kennedys. And Mr. Kennedy, Alex Kennedy, was a very busy man, not only farming and raising a family, but he was involved in things in the community, and he had a great love of history, and he was really very friendly and very lively, and just a wonderful man and a wonderful neighbor. And then Flora, as I said, in 1941 married Frank Weiss, and again, Frank Weiss, as I said, was the son of my dad's uncle's wife, Jenny Weiss, and I believe her name would have been probably Johanna, because Jenny was the sort of translation from Slovenian. There was always so many Jennies, it seemed. Frank Weiss was a farmer as well, and they had three sons, Frank, Bob, and Jim, and unfortunately Bob passed away in 2020, just shortly after his mother did. Frank Weiss, like Flora, was involved in the community. Again, he was a very wonderful man, friend, neighbor. Truly someone who has had an influence on many young people, and it is really wonderful to be able to speak to the way in which these people have contributed to the community here. It really is needs to be acknowledged. And now we're here at the graveside of it says Kastelic at the top, and there are a lot of Kastelics in the Sangudo area. The Kastelics came here in 1914. That was my father Frank's dad, Joseph, and his wife, Johanna Frances Pestir, who married in 1912, and then they came to Canada. They had, no, they're buried in Vancouver. They had 7 children in a home on the homestead on the farm, and they were very poor and struggling, like every other pioneer family did at the time. Coming in 1914, their older son, Joseph, had been born in the United States in 1915. Then there were 2 girls born. There was Jenny, another Jenny. She's referred to as Jenny or Jane or Johanna, I'm not sure which. And she was born in Canada. And then there was Adeline, and Adeline was born after Jenny. And then there was my dad, Frank, who was born during the terrible pandemic, the Spanish flu of 1918. He was born in December 23rd. I guess he was the Christmas gift to the family. Then after him was born my uncle Jim, who's also buried here and in this cemetery, and we will see his grave as well. Then there was, after Jim, there was another girl born, Lucille Doris, who just passed away a year and some ago. And then the very youngest was another boy, Albert Leo Kastelic, and he is buried here as well, and we will look at his grave too. My dad was a lifetime farmer and just was absolutely a true farmer in the sense that he could never get enough of it, and his love of the land has affected, I know it's affected me and so many of our family. His love of the farm, his love of nature, and his love of people, and his love of singing. As it says here, of tender heart and generous spirit, he loved and was loved, and that really does sum him up quite well. In 1943, my dad married a new immigrant to Canada, fairly new, Mary Laslip, and that was her full name as far as I know. She was born in 1922 and has just passed away here last November 29th. She was only 2 months shy of being 100 years old. Mary was the devoted and loving wife of Frank for many, many years until he passed in 2008. They just had celebrated with a huge gathering of family from all over in August, their 65th anniversary, and then he sadly passed away in December of that year. That was in 2008. My mother had, with my father, 8 daughters who worked together on the farm and in the house, learning and sharing many skills that we are all very grateful to have been allowed and given the opportunity to do that. Although it didn't seem like it at the time, it didn't seem like an opportunity, but looking back on it now, that's exactly what it was. The ability to work in the home, to make bread and to cook and to put a meal on, and to know how to do that well enough. And then the ability to go outside and work in the garden and raise potatoes. And also out there in the fields, later on, I stooped, that tells you how long ago that was, cleaned the barn for the work teams of horses during thrashing. And later on, I guess you could say I graduated to the tractor era with riding the stooker when we were making stoops or bales, and also raking hay and picking wild oats out of. I never got to sow my wild oats. I just got to pick it. And not that I minded, because I got to be out in those plots, in those fields that when my dad was raising pedigreed seed grain, and that was in the last, probably 30 years of his farming time. And so I got to do that, and I loved that opportunity to be outside walking in the plots and cleaning them up for inspection. So I just will close here with the gratitude that I hold standing by here, by their and their presence is certainly always felt. These two individuals have contributed so much to my life and the life of my family and so many, and for them we say thank you, and we love them, of course, as much as ever, and their presence is always with us in the people we know and the things that we do. And I am just, again, so very grateful to have had the chance to be a part of that particular family. Okay, now we're here with Jim Kastelic and his wife, Margaret, together. They were married for a very long time, too. They married in 1945. And Jim passed away on Marge's birthday. No, that was December 29th. And he was just so ready to be with his Lord, as he said. He lost Margaret, or Marge, as we called her. Marge was the sister of my dad's wife Mary. So two sisters married two brothers. The sisters came over together from what would be now Slovakia. It was called Czechoslovakia at the time, in 1938, and they were in Drumheller for a while. My mom and Marge were in Calgary, and then they came as Grandpa Laslip came to the Sangudo area to farm after he had had a very long career in the mines. So that's the background there. Jim was an absolutely wonderful uncle to have and to know. He lived just down the road from us, and I never, as I was growing up, realized what a treasure that was to have this uncle who was so incredibly smart and lively and positive and encouraging. And he was, I know I can say all those things because he wasn't my dad, but at the same time, Jim was a loving, loving family man. He like my dad, farmed from the heart, and he loved to grow garlic. And he and Marge gardened after their active farming years came to an end. Then they took up gardening, and Jim would grow garlic. And I do remember hearing the total of 3,100 and something or other of that number. And of course, he didn't grow it to sell it or anything. He gave it to whoever would take it from him, and they did. And that was his pride and joy. Marge was an absolutely generous and wonderful person, wife, mother to Sandy, Stuart, Sharon, and John that Marge and Jim had together as a family. It was just Marge's way to make everyone feel welcome, and she was an incredible cook and gardener, and she had such a way of making people feel welcome, just like my mom did. I guess they learned it well from their families, and they certainly shared that tradition. Jim and Marge were an incredible source of information about so many things. They were two very, very wise people, and they shared their wisdom generously, and it was such a treasure to have had them in my life. And again, I am so deeply grateful. I thought I was grateful before, but now with this reflection, I have in the latter years, particularly after they passed away, I have really come to treasure what they have given so generously. This is my aunt and uncle's graveside. My uncle Albert, as I mentioned earlier, was the youngest in the family, and he was my dad's youngest brother. He was like the brother I never had. He was a lot of fun-loving, because he was so much younger. I was really aware of his youth and his energy and his teasing. And I remember Albert asking me as he was feeding the pigs, he said to me, a railroad crossing without any cars, can you spell that without any R's? And I was just, I guess, learning the alphabet, learning to read, and I was quite puzzled, and he kept saying, can you spell that? And then I finally realized what he meant. He was really truly a wonderful man. He wrote a book about his life, and I was so glad to be able to read that, A Life Well Lived. He married Audrey Anderson in 1952, and I was their flower girl, one of the flower girls. And so they came home to the farm after their honeymoon to Vancouver. They came home and they lived at the farm for about 4 years. So I had a lot of opportunity to get to know them. They had 7 children, two or three of which were born at the farm when they lived there with us. And they didn't live with us, they had their own little house in the yard. And I always admired Audrey because she was so glamorous. She seemed to have everything just the way it should be. And my sister, my older sister, and I really looked up to her. And she, again, like my mother, like Auntie Marge, they were wonderful cooks and gardeners and all the things that they could do. Absolutely amazing. They had 7 children: Doug, Dawn, David, Lori, Lisa, Leanne, and Darren. And they worked very hard together on the farm. They were absolutely involved in the community, very like in the Elks and in the in different ways helping out in the community. Absolutely there when needed. And again, it is with my deepest gratitude that I come to acknowledge what they have contributed to my life. And I am really very grateful again for that. This is my grandfather, Joseph Laslip, who was born in the country of Czechoslovakia, which is now known as Slovakia. He was an incredible man who was a miner and then later a farmer. He was the father to 3, one of which was my mother, and an aunt and an uncle: Joe Laslip, Mary Laslip, my mother, and Margaret, or Marge Laslip, my aunt, my mother's sister. Joe came to Canada in 1926 to pursue mining, as there were more opportunities here for him to do that. His wife, Rosalie, and we'll speak about her in a moment, did not want to come to Canada at the time. She thought it was too wild of a place, wild as in not settled, and too much of a frontier. And she did not want to take her 3 children to a place that was really so unsettled. So he came to Canada, and in the Drumheller area, he worked in the coal mines there until 1938. And then he came to the Sangudo area and took up farming. Well, that was quite a change of pace, working underground and then working the ground from the other side, which my grandfather did. He did both very well. He was an incredible man in terms of his physical strength. He could chop wood and do all kinds of physical things well into his older age. He was very, very wise and very strong in body and mind and spirit. And he never really stopped looking on the optimistic side of things. And he used to say things like, well, what's a fella gonna do? He just did not get too upset about things. He was just ready to take up whatever task had to be done and do it as best he could. Over here is my grandmother, Rosalie, and she was always called Rosalie. She was never called Rose. And she was from Handlova, just as my grandfather was from, in Czechoslovakia. She was born in 1900, so she always smiled and said, everybody knows how old I am when they know when I was born. She stayed in Europe, as I said already. She wanted to be there with her extended family because that was what she knew. They lived in the town of Handlova, but they had large gardens, and there was a lot of rural activities. There was sheep and goats and all kinds of other small farming operations that she would have been familiar with. Rosalie was a very gentle woman who was very, very quiet and gave everything to her family, almost to a fault. She loved to make quilts. She loved to cook and make soup from scratch. She had an incredible garden, and she grew everything right from seed, no bedding plants. She had beautiful raspberries and lots of potatoes and not a weed in the garden. And that's amazing because they didn't even have running water. So all the water was carried from barrels. And she did that very well. And she made wonderful sauerkraut and beautiful raspberry jam. She was an incredible cook for sure. Okay, that
Jane,
is.
Jane, I'd like to say something about your Uncle Joe, that
Sure.
upper, their
Yeah.
son, Joe Jr. He and his wife Peggy, who lived, she was a war bride, couldn't spit that out, and they lived right across the river from us. So we had not a real close relationship because their children were younger than we were. But at one point, when Nelson, my oldest son Darren, was just a much more than a toddler, he attempted to cross the river because he saw Joe's youngest boy, David, across there with a toy that Darren was interested in. And he attempted to walk across the river, which was right there at the ancient fording spot. It was low water and rapids there. Well, Joe saw this happening, and Joe plucked Darren out of the water, having gone under for the third time, saved his life.
Oh my God. That is
So Joe and Peggy had 3 children, Frida, Paul, and David. And Paul comes every once in a while and checks on the place. Nobody lives there, but he does come and check. So that's my story about the Laszlows.
And now we're switching sides, as we might say, because this family here, this couple, John and Helen Andriuk, were my in-laws, the parents of Ron Andriuk, and they came to Sangudo in the very early 1950s, I believe. They had taken up the management and running of the Sangudo Hotel. John Andriuk was a farmer before he became a hotelier, and he was the dad of 4 boys in a row. Alec, Robert, John, and then there was a daughter born, Doreen, and Ron. And there was always lots of help, of course. But when they moved to Sangudo, it was Doreen and Ron who were really the family. The other boys had already left home. And I forgot to mention Jack, who's buried just behind me here. His gravesite is there, and Jack was a farmer in the Sangudo area after he left working on roadways. He was a surveyor and I guess that kind of technical work. John then was farming in the area north and east of Edmonton, which was the Andrew, and he also managed a hotel before he came to Sangudo, and then he took over the hotel. Helen Stackerup, who was from the area north and east of Edmonton. Helen and John both were born in Canada. Their family had come from Ukraine much earlier than many of the settlers in this area. Helen was the one who ran the room part of the hotel, and she was really known for her cooking. She ran a kind of dining room, I guess, cafe, and she was always cooking, and her food was always very good, and I know very much appreciated. Helen also loved to garden, although with the hotel business, she just didn't have a lot of time for that. But she did love to get out and grow flowers and so on whenever she could. And they have John and Helen then both left the hotel business in 1970, and it was in 1972 that Helen passed away, and then John passed away 3 years after that. But truly, they were part of the Sangudo community, and we remember their hotel ownership.
Okay, I just want to include Bill Hellam here because Bill operated the town blacksmith shop. And I'm certain all those farmers went to him for anything they needed to be manufactured. Lily, in her book, Heavens to Betsy, tells the story about Bill constructing the wide blade that was used to level the ice in the curling rink. That was just one of the many jobs, I suppose. And he was well known as the blacksmith in the area. He and his wife Lil had 2 children, Ray and Doreen. Doreen's grave is right next there. Doreen was crippled. We're not sure if it was cerebral palsy or polio, but I do know that she was sent to a school somewhere east of Edmonton to be educated, at least for a time. So I think that's all I can say about the Hellam family. We're here at the Swede Anderson name site. Harold was his proper name, but he was only known as Swede. And his wife Mildred was a Kastelic, right? But anyway, Swede ran a dray service way back in the 40s. And with a dray service, you had your team of horses and a wagon, but he was prepared to haul all sorts of things, utility-wise. He took away garbage and I think even ashes, hauled water, delivered water around, but he would go to the train station and collect whatever had come in and then deliver it to wherever it belonged. Part of that would be the mail. So he would pick up the mail and then bring it up to the post office. But yeah, he hauled all sorts of things. Now there was a large barn, livery barn is what you call those barns, and it was right about where the post office is now. A big barn, I still do recall that. And that's where he kept his horses. His horses were prized possessions of his and kept them in wonderful condition, as well as his wagon and so on. So I think that's my sweet story.